Hey, thanks for joining us today for a discussion of Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet. I'm Rebecca DeHarling, one of the Paper Lantern writers, and with me today is Kathryn Pritchett, another Paper Lantern writer. Hi, Kathryn.
Hi, Rebecca. Great to be here with you to
Thank
discuss this wonderful book.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to start off with, I should say also, due to some unforeseen circumstances, we are recording this ahead of time, so it's not live as you're watching it, but we'll be on the chat live on Friday as it comes up, so we can respond to your questions there. So just a little bit different way we had to do it this time. So I'm going to start off with just a little bit of background about O'Farrell herself, and also a little background about the novel, sort of what inspired her to write this novel. So O'Farrell was born in Northern Ireland. She grew up with her mother and two sisters in Wales and Scotland. As an adult, she's lived in Hong Kong, where she worked for a computer magazine, and she's lived in London as an arts journalist. But she says that Ireland has not let go of her, and she still sometimes mistily thinks that she'll wind up in Ireland. Hamnet is her eighth work of fiction, but just her second historical fiction, and the first one being The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox. She also wrote a memoir called I Am 17 Brushes with Death. And she talks about how when she was a girl, she was 8, she got encephalitis and was out of school for months due to that illness, and sort of she has described how you sort of have hallucinations, and even still there's sort of sometimes she feels disoriented, which supposedly is something that can happen um, even after you've long since left the encephalitis behind, hopefully. Um, she uh, all the critics have remarked about how she portrays grief, and she said that she hasn't lost someone really close, but her fear for her daughter, who has a lot of health problems and is particularly very allergic, subject to possible anaphylactic shock, and it's that sort of informed her ability to imagine Hamnet. And at one point, she said she was a little reluctant to write about an 11-year-old boy who died because she had a son who was like 9 at that time. But she did. She also has 2 girls. Um, when she was 16, she went to a as they call it there, a fancy dress party, and she dressed as Hamlet. She just read it and being really taken with the play. She had on a black shirt, a ruffled paper collar, a cloak made out of a skirt, her Doc Martens, cheeky shorts, and black leggings, and borrowed a skull from the biology lab. What made her, I think, she said, interested in writing this book is the indignation she felt on behalf of Shakespeare's wife, that she's so often portrayed as, this older woman who, tricked Shakespeare, and, he had to marry her because she got pregnant, and, he didn't really care about her. And she said, she read a book by Germaine Greer called Shakespeare's Wife, and in it, Greer talks about how there's really very little known about Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway's, here called Agnes, about their personal lives. So people just sort of made stuff up. Germaine Greer claims, and in it we sort of come down with this pretty negative view of Shakespeare's wife, and I think in part, like Greer did, O'Farrell wanted to show a different side of maybe this is what she was actually like, and not this sort of drag on Shakespeare that we sort of is kind of the traditional way to see it. They even bring up, I want to bring a couple of interesting examples. They talk about one of the things is in Shakespeare's will, he said, I leave my wife the second best bed. And scholars have, glammed onto that and said, well, this shows he's showing that he doesn't care about her. And it's almost like a willfully kind of cruel snub. But actually, as it turns out, um, the family furniture often went to the next generation. Your bed was something that you would hand down from one generation to another. So this would go to the children, the best bed, and the second best bed is the one that he gave his wife. So it's not a snub, it's just tradition. And then actually some Shakespeare center said, well, actually, your bed was a way of showing your wealth. And a lot of times they would put the bed on the first floor of the house so people could see that you had this really fancy bed. And that's the one that guests would be in when they came and spent the night. So again, so they said the second best bed was probably Shakespeare and Anne Hathaway's marital bed. So, it just shows we need to stay in context of the times. Those of us who are historical fiction writers struggle with that all the time.
Well, I didn't know anything about her before this book. Did you?
No, I didn't. And, I started reading it and thought, wow, she's taking a lot of leeway with Anne Hathaway here. But then when I started looking into it, it was like, oh, what's so often said about her isn't really based on much. So I thought that I really wanted to address that in case other people have that reaction that I did, is like, wow, she's just pulling this out of nowhere. Really, she was this other way. Well, we don't actually know that much about what she was like. And also the idea that, the question shouldn't be why did Shakespeare marry her, is why did she marry him? Because she had a nice diary, she had dowry, and she had, her family had land, and it said that at that time, if you were, late 20s, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, you're a desperate spinster now. It wasn't that way. And also, apparently, they've looked into records, and about a third of marriages took place when the woman was already pregnant. So that wasn't even that unusual. So all that is as a background. She calls her Agnes because that's what she's called in her father's will. And also, it says there's no evidence that he disliked his wife. After he retired, he went home and lived there. He built that home for his wife that they talk about in the book, and sent money back to support her and the family all the time. So it actually, I find it a little more comforting than the traditional view of Anne Hathaway and Shakespeare.
Oh, absolutely. And I thought it was fascinating that he basically worked in the city, and she worked, she kept the home fires burning far away and without the communication that we have in modern times. But that's not an unheard of arrangement.
Yes.
Now, right?
Yeah. So let's go to some questions. Kathryn, I was gonna. What did you think about the way that she reimagined Shakespeare's wife?
Oh, I love this book, and I did not know anything about her beforehand. So to me, I think she drew a beautiful character. If I were the real Anne Hathaway, I would be very pleased with this treatment.
Yes.
I think she's complex. She's not a saint by any means. She has her own desires, and she pays for it dearly, although I don't know how much she could have done around the actual death of her son. But I like that she's so complex. At one point, Shakespeare's talking about her, and he says she is an altogether confusing person. I think that was a wonderful way to describe her. She's appealing, but she's not. It's hard to pin down exactly who she is. What did you think?
I also really liked her, and sort of would just echo the things that you said. She also has that aspect of sort of, not exactly magical, but some sort of powers that she kind of knows what's going to happen. And
that's an appealing superpower to have, I think.
It is.
I love the way that if she touches you, she can see into your future. I mean, if you're going to give someone a magical quality, I thought that was a very intriguing one. This
Yes.
forecasting into the future,
Yes. Yes.
and one that's fraught too, because how much would any of us really like to know what's coming our way? And she sees some sad things coming.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Plus, you worry about her being, and she is depicted as someone that people wouldn't trust. They would think of her as a witch, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
you know that in
Yes.
that space,
I
that's
kept
not.
sort of being afraid something was going to happen
Yeah, me too. Me
as I
too.
was reading it. Yeah. But
Mhm.
um, I read a review by Geraldine Brooks, who
Mhm.
said, "Here, right at the start, O'Farrell plants her flag. This novel will be about grief, how we experience it, how we respond to it, what it costs, and whom it damages." What do you think about that?
Yeah, it is a book about grief. I think I was so interested to hear in your intro here that she had so many experiences and brushes early on with death.
Mhm,
So even if she's talking about worrying now about her own child, she clearly had to think about this in her own life growing up.
mhm,
And
mhm,
maybe watching the adults around her deal with some grief around it.
mhm,
So she's well versed in it. And she describes it beautifully. I do think the book is a very mournful tale. There's
mhm.
very little, there are moments of humor, but this is not a light read, right?
No.
In fact, I think that to me, the only kind of comical, and of course it's heading towards disaster chapter, is the flea chapter,
Mhm.
which has a lot of movement and is fun to read, to see how she's going to get the bubonic plague there.
Yes, yes, yes.
But this is a sad book. It's a sad book all the way through.
Mhm.
Her life circumstances before she meets Shakespeare are sad and don't
Yes.
have a lot of potential, and then having to live with her in-laws is not a
Yeah.
good thing, and then her husband
Yes.
on and her children die. I mean, it's a mournful book.
It is, it is. And I think it was really bold putting that chapter in about how the plague came to, there, because it's just, obviously completely stops all the action, and here's this long involved tale about the flea,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I haven't read or heard anybody say that was terrible. Why did she do that?
Oh,
Everybody said it's it's amazing what she
I
did.
think it's an amazing chapter. Really,
Yeah.
Matt. I reread it today before we talked, and I just thought, oh, this is so well done,
Mhm.
because you have all the little side bits, the
Mhm.
glass making, the ship
Mhm.
people, and you're curious about how all that's going too. But
Yes. Yes.
read, like I said, of impending
Yes.
doom,
Yes.
all that propels you to find out what's going to happen, how that flea is going to get into Shakespeare's home.
Yeah. How do you think, it seems like it's so hard it would be hard to maintain suspense when the reader knows from the very beginning what's going to happen. We
Mhm.
know that Hamlet's going to die. I mean, she tells us even in case you didn't know, she tells you right away even before the novel starts, that Hamlet's going to die. And yet you're somehow pulling for him the whole time. And I don't know how she manages to do that. Did you have
Mhm.
any ideas on that?
Well, I have to say I wasn't that engaged with the character of Hamlet himself that much.
Oh.
I mean, that sounds pretty cold-hearted on my part. I was much more invested in Anne Agnes, however her name would be pronounced, and the daughters. I think she draws them all so much more. He's almost just a prop.
Mm,
He shows up. The first line of the book feels like a stage direction, right? He
mm,
comes like he enters down the stairs. He comes down the stairs. To me, it felt like she was giving directions to here I got it here. A boy is coming down a flight of stairs. He doesn't even have a name there.
interesting.
He's
Yeah, yeah.
just a prop or a side character in my mind that's coming through this. And so there wasn't suspense to me about how he died. The suspense was, how is this going to affect everybody else in the book?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah.
And again, I picked up this book. I knew it had been, it was on all the best of the year lists or whatever. I think I got it for a year-end gift or something. I wasn't even sure what it was about. I didn't realize that this was going to be about Shakespeare's wife and the child
Mhm.
who dies, and that Hamnet was another name for Hamlet.
Mhm.
And so I was more picking up the stories that went along, and then curious about how is this affecting this family?
Mhm.
How's it going to affect the marriage? Will they reconcile? And learning, the suspense was also learning more about Shakespeare, who is
Yeah.
not called by name through this book.
Right.
You don't
Yes.
even know who they're talking. If you had never, as I blithely went into this book, if you didn't know that's what this was about, it would take you some period of time to figure out that's who we were talking about here.
Yes, it would. Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the suspense for me. What did you think?
Yeah. Well, I think that's an interesting perspective. I think I maybe wasn't um quite as removed from Hamnet as you were, but I think it is true that the unknown part is how the family is going to react and deal with it. The part about not using names, um, O'Farrell said uh, that she, let's see, oh, here. Um, when you're sitting at your computer, immersed in the world you've created, and have to write, William Shakespeare had his breakfast, it's impossible not to think I'm an idiot. Even calling him William seems colossally presumptuous. And it seems like she has quite the sense of humor from interviews and things that she's given. And I thought, okay, that is a way you get around it. You don't exactly say Shakespeare, although the reader does eventually figure it out that this is who
Mm-hmm.
this is supposed to be.
Mm.
Um,
I think that added a layer of suspense, as we were talking about, and I wanted to find out more about him as time went on because he was this unnamed character in here.
mhm,
I thought that was brilliant, actually,
yeah.
to have him be a minor character within this major story.
Yes,
Because
yes,
had he been the main character, it would have been all about him
yes.
instead of the larger cast of characters.
Yeah. I think that it's also interesting how O'Farrell a couple of times sort of gets in his head, and because you've got to think, what was it like to be in Shakespeare's head? You just can't. I mean, I can't imagine that. And she gives some interesting things. I'm going to see if I can find the reference. Oh shoot. But she talks about I'm not finding it. I'm sorry. There being noises in his head and people are talking and all of this is going on in his head and he needs to be in his place in London and shut the door and be by himself and nobody's going to bother him and nothing is going to disturb him
Mhm.
so that this can flow from him onto the paper. And it also made me empathize a little bit more with Shakespeare because I mean, I've often thought, well, gee, did he really have to leave his wife behind and go to London and do all these great things? But it does make you feel that he was compelled. What and you saw that he needed to do that.
Absolutely, definitely compelled, and I can relate to that as a writer myself. I'm no Shakespeare, but I worked for years out of corners of little rooms with a busy family running around, and I mean it's only in the last 10 years that I've really been able to have that kind of luxury. And
Mhm,
most women, that's the case if they have a
mhm,
family, right?
mhm,
I mean it is a little bit. Well, yes, it's all well and good. You get to go off to London, and she doesn't
mhm.
do that, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, but yes, that the first letter he writes home, or one of the letters, is all about what's happening on stage, and then the
Mhm.
last line is, "Oh, and I want you to go look at this piece of property." Right?
Yes,
You can
yeah,
tell that's what he's thinking about.
yes.
Also, very stereotypically male that he's not able to multitask.
Mhm.
He's doing the job, which is creating these plays, and the artist's job, which is creating a work of art, and then occasionally he can think about this family on the side. So
Yes.
you had asked separately whether you'd want to be married to him. as he's portrayed here, that's a good question. Would you want
That's
to
a
be?
good question. No, I don't think so. I mean, because also you wouldn't know that's Shakespeare.
And you don't see, she doesn't portray them having deep conversations about love,
No,
power, what,
no.
the themes that are in Shakespearean plays. It's not that Agnes is not bright. I mean, we see that in those early scenes where he's the tutor, that
Hmm.
she is definitely, she's literate, she
Hmm.
has deep thoughts, but that doesn't seem to be where their connection is at all.
No.
So what does she get out of the marriage to him? I mean, we know from the way she set it up, and again, she's made this up, she's told us that it provides her a way of getting out from under her stepmother and having a space of her own, but you don't see them connecting in the way a modern couple would necessarily.
No, you don't. And it does say that she had other suitors
Mhm.
too, once they found out about her dowry. And so she clearly chose him for a reason. There was one part that I was looking at today that's I think it's he's gone and she's about to give birth to the twins.
Mhm.
And she's, sort of like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking sending him away? And she says something about the way that he leans in and listens. And it's
Mhm.
almost like perhaps that he recognized her and he chose her as someone that he would, want to be with, want to be interested in. He was taken with her when he saw her from the window when he was tutoring her brothers. So
Mhm.
maybe that was partly
Mhm.
that he it was her that he was interested in. He didn't even know who she was at first. He thought she was one of the servant girls when he first encountered her. So
And that seems like an astute supposition that Shakespeare was a good listener. I mean, that he
mhm,
did pay attention to human nature so
yeah,
that he could then depict it in
yeah,
his plays. But I don't know, he did have the sense that and I think he was trying to support his family. It wasn't just that he was trying to be an artist with a capital A,
mhm,
um, but that his attention towards her was limited, and then he would go off to do his other things. So she
mhm.
enjoyed it when she had it, but it was not a constant in her life.
Well, and she had to put up with a lot too because they make it pretty clear that he had other women when he was
Mm,
in London. Susanna, I think, or I can't remember if it's Susanna or Judith, sort of realizes that her mother needs a few days to get the other women off of him once he comes home. Their aura is still there, and she can't embrace him immediately when he comes home, but she does eventually. That would be very hard. And there's sort of this sense of women taking care of men too. There's one just brief thing where I think Agnes is talking maybe with her mother-in-law, Mary, and saying, women have to do this, take care of the kids, da 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 da, and take care of the men and assess them. And it's almost like we have to baby them, and in a way that's what Agnes does, right? When she recognizes
mhm,
that he's stifled where he is and so
mhm,
unhappy, and
mhm,
she's willing to sacrifice his presence for
mhm.
his good.
And not willing to go to London herself. I mean,
Right. Right. Well, and because they were afraid that was it Susanna wasn't in health, good health. I think it was
mhm,
Susanna. But then, clearly when the girls are older, it would have worked, but yeah, they never do that.
mhm, mhm,
Um, the O'Farrell's own comment about it being presumptuous to write a book about Shakespeare, and I read another critic that was saying reminded her of the person who wrote Ahab's Wife,
mhm,
and said something about the person the critic who was reviewing it was reviewing Ahab's Wife said the person had to the author and did in this critic's opinion, um, you know have a lot of gravitas. It said because you don't go after a whale with a minnow. and, and she's saying, that maybe O'Farrell with her background was pretty um, attuned to. She was a good person to write this because she had a lot of sort of folk tale-y feeling in her background too. So that the language and music, they had a lot of songs in her use, so she could kind of get the language right.
Mhm.
Did you think that yes, she's worthy of writing a book about Shakespeare?
Well, it's such a humbling book to read. She's such a beautiful writer,
Mm,
and you just have to say we all write the way we all write. But
yes,
it is melodic. I think
yes,
I pulled through as much by wanting to read the writing as anything else. You know,
yes, I think
you could
so
just sit
too.
on the page and say, "Oh,
Yes.
what a terrific description," and yet it's not tedious. I mean, I've known writers who are wonderful at description, but it really bogs the story down.
Mhm,
You
mhm.
don't have any sense of the characters. It's writing for writing's sake, and that's not this book.
No, it isn't. And when you bring out description, she does this sort of really fascinating place. I'm gonna actually even read a little bit. And she does this in a few places where I I wrote on my notes, she stacks descriptions.
Mhm.
She kind of just gives like a phrase for
Mhm.
different things. So this is Anya says seeing Eliza being sad. And she says of Anya's, she sees everything. The rose hips on the hedgerow that are turning to brown at their tips, unpicked blackberries too high to reach, the swoop and dip of a thrush from the branches of an oak by the side of the track, the white stream of breath from the mouth of her stepmother as she carries the youngest boy on her back, the strands of strangely colorless hair escaping from her kerchief, the wide swing of her hips. I mean, that's not the way authors usually do description, but it's so effective.
It is. It is. Again, it's just so beautiful. I put the book down and immediately started rereading it again. Both I
Mhm.
wanted to. I think it has a slow start, to be honest, and I've heard
Mm.
several people say that. Um, and again, I was figuring out the story, but some of the rereading was finding my place in it again, figuring out what was going on. A lot of it was I just wanted to go back over that language. It's so beautiful.
Mhm. Yes, me too. Absolutely beautiful one. In fact, I'm gonna read one of my favorite passages here. And this is talking about Agnes. There's a part of her that would like to wind up time, to gather it in like yarn. She would like to spin the wheel backwards, unmake the skein of Hamnet's death. There will be no going back, no undoing what was laid out for them. Beautiful. It's just
So
beautiful.
beautiful. It is just so beautiful. Yes, I thought I felt the same about it, and I was going to do a follow up section, but now I can't find the one I thought I wanted to read. It was about his death, though, and let's see if I can find it here. No, it's not where I thought it was. What it did, though, it was about her looking for him, that she was trying to place people, after he died, and yet she couldn't find him. There was no finding him. And I
Mhm.
thought there is a lot of, we talk about this being a book of grief, it's a lot about loss and people missing too.
Mhm.
Anya's is missing when she needs to be where she should
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Child is. Shakespeare's always missing. He's in,
Yes.
right, and so you have these missing people and missing each other, missing in multiple ways, and the
Mhm.
searching for each other and trying to find each other. And again, back to what is propelling you through this book? It's finding people as much as anything. Lost,
Mhm.
I think, all the way through. But it's her
Yeah,
language.
that's really interesting. I mean, in that the beginning, so that is exactly what's happening at the
Mm-hmm.
beginning too, like very intensified.
Right.
Interesting. And talking about the language, I read something that said, and I think this is hard for we as historical fiction writers, is how do you write in a language that seems like it could be from that time, but isn't really. I mean, she's not writing in Shakespearean language.
We couldn't read it
It's
if
totally credible that
right.
it would be how they would speak there, and she does a wonderful job of that. I think
Yeah.
it never seems stilted or unrealistic, um,
Mm-hmm.
and neither does it seem anachronistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's really it's a fine line to tread, I think.
But it
And
doesn't feel modern either.
hmm?
It doesn't feel modern.
No, it doesn't feel modern.
It
No,
doesn't
it
feel like
doesn't.
a contemporary novel. You definitely are
No.
at place and time.
Yes, you do. You know it from the language. Yes. How
Mm-hmm.
does she do that? um, looking here, other notes I might have. It was interesting how she uses Shakespearean sort of tricks about, the gender bending. The twins would, fool people by pretending they were the other one, and then, of course, he had twins a lot. So
Well,
that's
and the conclusion, not to spoil it, but you have the in and out of the two Hamlets on stage.
yes,
And
yes.
the
Well, let's talk about the end.
yeah.
I I loved it. I
Mm-hmm.
when I finished it, as you said, I didn't go back to the very beginning immediately, but I went back to the ending, the last few pages before the ending, because it was magical, and I didn't. It was hard at first to figure out where she was going with it,
Right.
and then all of a sudden, Anya understands, and then of course
Mm-hmm.
we understand with her. But this
Yes, I had to reread it as well. I think it's well done, but it's so complex.
it's so complex.
It's hard to see what it's doing.
Yes, the idea of
And the pivoting of her reaction to what she's seeing.
Mhm. Yes, because she was so angry at first, right? How could he take she was even angry when she saw the playbill with his with the name Hamlet on, because how could he
Mhm.
it was like he was being taken from her again. And yet when she sees the play and realizes what he's done, that he's
Mhm.
sort of switched places, and that he had trained the young actor playing Hamlet to be like Hamnet.
Mhm.
And it was that, and she brings it up. She says it in the at the ending, that like, this is what any parent would do. You would say, "Take me instead of my child," and
Which
that's what
has already been there's been foreshadowing of this with Hamnet saying that about Judith, right? He takes her.
Yes, 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 yes. He decided that he was going to be the one to go, not
Mhm.
his sister. Yeah, I had thought of that one. Yeah.
Well, and she says at the end when she before she is turned, she said, "How could he thieve his name?" You know,
Mhm, mhm.
love that phrase, thieve his name,
Yes,
take
yes,
the name of their
yeah,
dear son and just turned it into a commercial venue, a
yes,
commercial project, right?
yes, yes.
And then she says, and this goes to my point of this is all about looking for somebody who's missing. She
Mhm,
says she's looked for her son everywhere, ceaselessly, these past 4 years, and here he is.
mhm, mhm.
So not only for Shakespeare, but for her, the son has been brought to life again.
Yes, yes,
Ellie
yes, yeah,
really could be at that point.
yes. Such a we've said how the book is about grief, and what an incredibly creative way to portray how grief could be
Mm-hmm.
not denied or eliminated, but assuaged a little bit.
Yeah,
It's just, really wonderful.
really stunning, isn't it? And that they do share the same name. One would think this is plausible
Mhm.
that Shakespeare used this son's name
Yes,
to create
yeah,
this, to
yeah.
have the title character be the same name.
Yes, yes. And, apparently some critics have, through the centuries would be like, well, he doesn't seem to have been very, upset by his son's death. And it seems like O'Farrell really wants to say no? How could you not be? How could somebody like Shakespeare with the sensitivities that he had, how could he not be upset by his son's death? In fact, here's what he did. And I just, it's a wonderful. I would like to think that that is that is what he
And it's
consciously did.
really one of his best known plays,
Hmm.
true masterpiece. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you had asked me earlier what I thought about the final line. I think it's. I'm curious to hear what you say, because
Oh,
it's
remember me. So
yeah,
is
five
he is
words and another spoiler alert. Or remember me. So who is to be remembered in this?
I think he's saying, well, it could be both, right? It could be both. He's saying, remember Hamnet, because now I've taken over the part of the dead person, but also maybe saying to his wife, because it says he looks right at her then, right? Of course, could he have predicted she was going to come and watch the play? I don't know, but that he also wants to be remembered as himself. I mean, he clearly has grieved too. We just don't see it. And nor does Anya see it. I mean, he leaves shortly after Hamnet dies and says, "Well, I can't abandon my players." And she says, "But you could abandon us." But we know that he's just stifled there, and maybe it's the grief that does push him back to London too. But maybe the remember me is for both.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was very powerful.
I think so too. And I haven't known. I actually, thankfully, don't know people who've lost a young child. My mother-in-law lost an adult child to cancer, and I saw how much she grieved,
Mhm,
even though he was well into his,
mhm,
he was in his 30s. It wasn't old, but he was a grown man.
mhm.
But I do have the sense that people who have lost children, it does often drive a wedge between the husband and wife.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Hard to look to the other person when you're dealing with your grief. So.
Yes, yeah. Well, um, that's about all I had to share. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
I've kind of included the things I thought, just again, that it was a beautifully written book. It's one, you talked about Ahab's wife. I just finished reading Moby Dick with
Uh,
Public Space and an online book club that formed over the pandemic. And Yi and Lee, who leads that group, often copies segments of Moby Dick out to help with her own writing. I
oh,
thought, this is a book I would do this with.
mhm,
Not
mhm.
every book would I think the writing is so good that it's worth copying and
Yeah.
trying to learn from, but I would say that this book meets that standard.
Yes, if one could somehow get her rhythm, her lyricism, it's just, get that in your head and see if you could do a little something with it. Yes, yeah,
And still hang on to a story, not
yes,
get lost in just the writing itself.
yeah. Okay, I guess we'll wrap it up. Please don't forget that we also, twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays, we have original content. We have our blogs. This month's theme that some of us are writing about is setting, and mine will be on this. Well, it was on this past Tuesday, and it's interesting to see the different takes people have come up with on setting. And next month it'll be about themes. So and we have lots and lots of past blogs you can explore on our website, paperlanternwriters.com. Upcoming, we have a couple of things I'd like to mention. One is some of us will be at the Bay Area Book Festival, which is in Berkeley. It's a wonderful event. We'll have a table. Some of us will be there selling our books, and there are many, many speakers. They have lots and lots of events, so it's definitely worth checking out the weekends of May 7th and 8th. And then after that, on May 15th, Paper Lantern writer Edie Kay will be talking to author Sarah Ackerman on Sunday, May 15th at 2 p.m. Pacific time. So I hope you can join us if you could join us in person, we would love to see you at the Bay Area Book Festival. And we would love to see you online at the Afternoon Tea Light with Sarah Ackerman. So thank you again for listening in. Take care.